Responding to possible gunshot with an injured baby.
The 911 call came from a student who lives at Pride Rock Residence Hall, a suite-style co-ed dorm for freshmen at Texas A&M Commerce. Inside, campus police say they found 2 women dead and a toddler injured.
Dorm room.
And there's a hole through my wall, and on the other side directly across, there's a nick in my calendar. So it looks like something was shot through the wall and hit my calendar.
So it looks like something was shot through the wall and hit my calendar, and the wall is all broken apart. That's what a student told 911 operators on February 3rd, 2020. Her voice was eerily calm as she described what she thought was just some damage to her dorm room. She had no idea she was calling about a double murder that had just happened on the other side of her wall. Texas A&M University Commerce, Pride Rock Dormitory, a freshman residence hall where students were supposed to be safe, where parents expected their kids would be protected, where 2 sisters would spend their final moments together. What happened in room 116 that morning would expose massive holes in a system designed to protect victims, a system that had already failed once when it released a man with a violent history just days before. A system that would fail again when that same man walked right into a supposedly secure building. The 911 caller continued, confused. It looks like part of the ceiling had fallen onto her floor and desk. There's a hole through her wall. She described a nick in her calendar, like something was shot through the wall. While she spoke, just feet away, 2 young women lay motionless. A toddler, bleeding but alive, was the only witness to what had just happened. Students across campus received alerts on their phones. UPD is actively investigating a shooting at Pride Rock. The campus is under shelter-in-place orders. Avoid the area until further notice. It felt chilling, like, this is not supposed to happen here, said student Esma Galvin, who saw police swarming outside Pride Rock as the alerts appeared on her phone. For hours, students huddled in classrooms and dorm rooms, texting parents and friends. Some had already lived through another campus-connected shooting just 3 months earlier at an off-campus party in Greenville. You didn't have to be there to be traumatized, student Jordan Polk would later say. As police secured the scene, they found something that didn't make sense. Pride Rock required key cards to enter the building, to use the elevator, and to access individual rooms. How did someone get in? Who was the target, and why? When the lockdown finally lifted, students returned to find yellow crime scene tape across doorways. Some couldn't get back into their rooms. Others didn't want to. Or inside room 116, investigators pieced together a story that began long before that morning. A story about 2 sisters, 19-year-old Deja Matz, a freshman with dreams of helping others through a career in public health, and her 20-year-old sister Abbaney, a devoted mother to a 2-year-old boy. Their stories should have been about achievement, sisterhood, and bright futures. Instead, it became a warning about what happens when restraining orders are just pieces of paper, when violent men are released back into society, and when the systems meant to protect the vulnerable completely fall apart. No one knew it yet, but the clock had started ticking on this tragedy a week earlier, when a man walked out of jail on a $15,000 bond. Athletic, smart, straight-A students, Timothy Matz would later say about his daughters, his voice breaking as he tried to capture in words what had been stolen from the world. Deja Matz was just 19, a freshman finding her way through the maze of college life. She wasn't just attending Texas A&M University, she was attacking it with purpose. Public health major, future nurse, a young woman who wanted to heal others, to make a difference. Her decision to pursue healthcare wasn't random. It was inspired by her mother, Vanessa Calderon, who worked in dentistry. Deja was following a family tradition of helping others. Friends described her as focused, determined, the kind of student who didn't just attend class but came prepared with questions. the kind who highlighted textbooks in multiple colors and kept her notes organized in labeled folders. She was the first in her immediate family to attend college, carrying the weight of those expectations with a quiet confidence. My daughters were both amazing go-getters, Vanessa would later say, that faint smile barely masking the ocean of grief behind her eyes.
My daughters were both amazing go-getters.
Abbaney took a different path, but with the same drive. She wasn't enrolled at the university, but that didn't mean she lacked ambition. Like her sister, she was drawn to medicine, hoping to build a career that would provide stability for herself and her son. At just 20, she was already navigating the complex world of young motherhood, balancing dreams with diapers, career goals with bedtime stories. Her 2-year-old son was her world. In family photos you can see it, the way she looked at him, a fierce protective love that defined her. She wasn't just raising a child, she was raising a good man, teaching him kindness and strength in a world that hadn't always shown her those qualities. The sisters shared more than DNA. They shared secrets, inside jokes, and that unique language siblings develop over years of shared experiences. They finished each other's sentences. They borrowed each other's clothes without asking. They fought like sisters do, quick arguments that dissolved into laughter minutes later. I don't think Deja would have had it another way. To leave here with her sister, their father would later say, finding the only possible comfort in an impossible situation, that at least in those final moments, they were together. The Matz sisters grew up in Garland, Texas, in a home where education mattered and family came first. Their parents, Vanessa Calderon and Timothy Matz, created a foundation of support and encouragement. They attended school events, celebrated achievements, and pushed their daughters to reach higher. The kind of parents who didn't just ask how was school today, but sat down and helped with homework, discussed college options, talked about the future. The family bond extended beyond the nuclear unit. When Abbaney became a mother at 18, there was no judgment, just a rallying of support. Grandparents stepped in to help with childcare. Deja became the world's most devoted aunt, spoiling her nephew with books and toys, reading to him before bed when she was home from college. That weekend before the shooting, the family had gathered to celebrate a birthday. Laughter filled the house. Photos were taken. No one knew they were creating final memories. They took her back Sunday night, and it was too late for her to come back this way, so she spent the night down there, and this happened. Both of my daughters, Timothy Matz would later explain, his voice hollow with disbelief. That decision, for Abbaney to stay overnight in Deja's dorm with her son because it was late, would place all three of them in the path of a man the system had failed to contain. The sisters shared dreams of working in healthcare, of making their parents proud, of building lives that mattered. Deja's dorm room walls were covered with inspirational quotes and photos of family. Abbaney's phone was filled with pictures of her son, her sister, her parents, the people who mattered most. They were ordinary in the most extraordinary ways. Young women figuring out their paths, sisters who had each other's backs, a mother and an aunt who adored a little boy, daughters who called home regularly, students with goals, women with futures that stretched endlessly before them until they didn't. What makes their story so gut-wrenching isn't just what happened to them. It's everything that should have happened instead. The graduations, the careers, the family holidays, the weddings, the children, the decades of sisterhood that should have been their birthright. Instead, their story became a cautionary tale about what happens when systems fail, when warnings go unheeded, when violence that has announced itself is allowed to roam free. Because while Deja and Abbaney were building futures, someone else was plotting to destroy them. Jacques Deshawn Smith wasn't always a monster in Abbaney's eyes. At some point, he was someone she trusted enough to bring around her son, her family, her life. Someone who said the right things, made the right promises. But relationships that end in murder don't turn toxic overnight. They rot slowly, the decay hidden until it's too late. By January 2020, whatever had once existed between them had warped into something dangerous. Abbaney wanted out. Jacques wanted control. It's a dynamic as old as time, but no less deadly for its familiarity. January 27th, 2020. Remember that date. It should have been the day the system protected Abbaney. Instead, it became just another missed exit ramp on the highway to tragedy. That day in Garland, Texas, Abbaney tried to end things with Jacques. His response? Pure rage. He grabbed a frying pan, a common kitchen item turned weapon, and struck her repeatedly. When that wasn't enough, he grabbed a lamp and continued the assault. Abbaney would later report injuries to her head and eyes from the attack. But Jacques wasn't done. As Abbaney tried to escape, he pulled a knife. The message was clear. If I can't have you, no one will. Somehow Abbaney escaped. She did everything right. She reported the assault to Garland police. She documented her injuries. She told them about the threats, the knife, the fear. The system finally seemed to work. Jacques was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. For a moment, Abbaney could breathe. Her attacker was in custody. She and her son were safe. She got an emergency protective order, a piece of paper that supposedly would keep Jacques away from her. A document that would prove to be as effective as tissue paper against a bullet. Because here's where the system cracked wide open. On January 29, just 2 days after the violent assault, Jacques Smith walked out of jail. The price of his freedom? A $15,000 bond. That's what the system decided was appropriate for a man who had beaten a woman with household objects and threatened her with a knife. Let that sink in. $15,000, 0 cents. That's what Abbaney's safety was worth. This wasn't Jacques' first dance with the criminal justice system. His rap sheet stretched back 4 years, with charges including evading arrest, theft, and aggravated robbery, a pattern of escalating behavior that should have set off alarm bells. Instead, it barely registered a beep. The protective order Abbaney received came with stern warnings for Jacques. Stay away from her. Don't contact her. Don't go near her residence or workplace. Standard language that looks impressive on paper, but offers little actual protection without enforcement. For the next 5 days, Abbaney lived in that false security that comes from believing the system works. She went about her life, caring for her son, staying in touch with her sister, making plans. She had no way of knowing that Jacques was already plotting. What was going through his mind during those 5 days between his release and the murders? Was he stewing in rage, planning his revenge? Did he know about Abbaney's plan to visit her sister at college? Or did he track her there? These are questions that haunt the Matz family to this day. Questions that might have been avoided if the system had recognized the threat Jacques posed and kept him behind bars. Where was security when all of this was going on? Timothy Matz would later ask, his question hanging in the air, unanswered. The bond that freed Jacques was the first catastrophic failure in a system designed to protect victims of domestic violence, a system that consistently underestimates the danger posed by abusers, a system that treats domestic violence as a relationship problem rather than the life-threatening crime it often becomes. Jacques' release set in motion a countdown that would end in room 116 of Pride Rock Dormitory, a countdown that could have been stopped at multiple points if only someone, anyone, had recognized the blazing red flags and acted accordingly. But no one did. And so on February 2, 2020, when Abbaney drove her sister back to college and decided to spend the night because it was late, she had no idea she was driving toward a nightmare. No idea that the protective order she carried was worthless. No idea that the system that promised to protect her had already failed in the most fundamental way. The stage was set, the trap was laid, and morning was coming. February 2, 2020 started as a celebration. The Matz family had gathered at their Garland home that weekend for a birthday party for Deja and Abbaney's brother. It was the kind of ordinary family gathering that becomes extraordinary only in hindsight, when you realize it was the last time everyone was together. They took her back Sunday night, Timothy Matz would later explain, his voice hollow with the weight of what-ifs. What if they'd left earlier? What if Deja had gone back alone? What if Abbaney had driven back to Garland despite the late hour? But that's not what happened. As Sunday evening stretched into night, Abbaney made the fateful decision to drive her sister back to campus. Deja had classes the next morning. She was serious about her education, never wanting to miss a lecture, so Abbaney, being the protective older sister she always was, packed her 2-year-old son into the car and made the drive to Commerce. By the time they arrived at Texas A&M University, Commerce, it was too late for Abbaney to safely make the return trip to Garland. It was too late for her to come back this way, Timothy would explain, so she spent the night down there. That night in room 116 of Pride Rock Dormitory was probably ordinary in every way. Maybe they stayed up late talking, the way sisters do. Maybe Deja showed Abbaney around campus, introduced her to friends. Maybe they put the toddler to bed and scrolled through social media, planning future visits. Maybe they talked about Abbaney's recent breakup, the protective order, her hopes for moving forward. We'll never know those details. What we do know is that it was their last night alive. Morning came, February 3rd, a Monday. Students across campus were dragging themselves to early classes, grabbing coffee, checking assignments. The ordinary rhythm of college life pulsing through the campus. In room 116, perhaps Deja was getting ready for class. Maybe Abbaney was helping her nephew get dressed, planning to leave after breakfast. Ordinary moments in ordinary lives. At approximately 10:17 a.m., that ordinary morning shattered. Gunshots echoed through Pride Rock Dormitory. Sharp, unmistakable sounds that don't belong in a place of learning. Sounds that sent students diving for cover, reaching for phones, texting loved ones. In the room next door, a student returned to her dorm to find what looked like part of the ceiling had fallen onto her floor and desk. She noticed a hole through her wall and a nick in her calendar, like something was shot through the wall. Not immediately recognizing the signs of violence, she called 911 with calm confusion. Meanwhile, campus alerts blared across thousands of phones. UPD is actively investigating a shooting at Pride Rock. The campus is under shelter-in-place orders. Avoid the area until further notice. Fear rippled across campus. Students who had lived through the off-campus Greenville shooting just months before experienced fresh trauma. "You didn't have to be there to be traumatized," student Jordan Polk would later say. As police responded to the scene, what they found in room 116 would haunt them. Deja and Abbaney, both shot dead, and somehow, miraculously, a 2-year-old boy, wounded but alive, the sole witness to an unimaginable horror. Before we continue this story, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the victims of domestic violence who are still living in fear. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous relationship, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. You don't have to face this alone. As police secured the crime scene, students huddled in lockdown, and a little boy was rushed to medical care. One question loomed large. How did this happen in a supposedly secure dormitory? The answer would reveal yet another catastrophic system failure, one that would have devastating implications for campus safety across the country. The timeline of violence that morning was brutally efficient. Jacques Deshawn Smith somehow entered Pride Rock Dormitory, a building that required keycard access, and made his way to room 116. What happened inside that room would later be pieced together through forensic evidence and the limited testimony of the only survivor, a traumatized 2-year-old boy. What we know is this: Smith entered the dorm room and opened fire. Both sisters were shot multiple times. Deja died instantly. Abbaney, perhaps trying to shield her son, was also fatally wounded. The toddler was struck by gunfire but survived. A miracle amid massacre. The shots were loud enough to be heard throughout the building, sending students into panic. Some barricaded themselves in rooms. Others fled. Many called parents, saying tearful goodbyes, just in case. "I was in my room and I heard like 3 gunshots," recalled student Larry Cooper III. At first, I thought it was just a balloon popping or something, but then I kept hearing it, so I looked outside. What he saw was chaos. Students running, campus police arriving with weapons drawn, fear etched on every face. At 10:17 a.m., the university's emergency alert system activated. Text messages, emails, and campus-wide announcements instructed everyone to shelter in place. For the next several hours, the campus became a ghost town populated by frightened students and faculty hiding behind locked doors. Inside Pride Rock, police moved methodically through the building, clearing rooms one by one. When they reached room 116, they discovered a scene that would haunt even veteran officers. 2 young women, their futures erased in seconds, and amid this horror, the whimpering of a child, wounded but alive. The child was taken to a local hospital and is in stable condition, university officials would later announce. A small mercy in an otherwise merciless situation. The toddler's injuries were serious but not life-threatening. A gunshot wound to his leg, physical wounds that would heal far faster than the psychological trauma of being present during his mother's murder. A child who would grow up with no memories of his mother except those preserved in photographs and family stories. As paramedics rushed the child to the hospital, investigators began the grim task of processing the crime scene. Bullet casings, blood patterns, the trajectory of shots through walls, each piece of evidence telling part of a story that made less sense the more they learned. How did the shooter gain access to a secure building? Why weren't the security measures effective? And most importantly, who would do this? The campus remained on lockdown for hours as police searched for the shooter who had fled the scene. Students huddled in classrooms, bathrooms, dorm rooms, anywhere they thought might be safe. We were on lockdown for about 2 hours, recalled student Esme Galvan. It felt like forever. Parents desperate for information flooded the university with calls. Social media filled with rumors and speculation. Fear fed on uncertainty as students wondered if the shooter was still on campus, still hunting. When the lockdown finally lifted around 1:30 p.m., students emerged to find their campus transformed. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off Pride Rock dormitory. Police vehicles lined the streets. News helicopters circled overhead. "I don't feel safe on campus," student Jalen Black told reporters. "How can someone just come into a dorm and shoot people?" It was a question that would haunt university administrators in the coming days. A question that exposed critical flaws in campus security nationwide. For the Matz family, the nightmare was just beginning. Timothy Matz and Vanessa Calderon received the call that no parent should ever receive. Both their daughters were dead, and their grandson was in the hospital. "I just dropped to my knees," Timothy would later recall. "How do you process losing both your daughters at once?" The family rushed to the hospital to be with the wounded toddler, now an orphan who would never again feel his mother's embrace. A child who would grow up with a scar on his leg as a permanent reminder of what was taken from him. As night fell on February 3rd, the university announced that classes would be canceled the following day. Counseling services were made available for traumatized students. A campus vigil was hastily organized. Meanwhile, police were piecing together the evidence, following a trail that would quickly lead them to Jacques Deshawn Smith. The protective order Abbaney had obtained was found in her possession, a document that had failed to protect her when it mattered most. By evening, investigators had enough evidence to name Smith as the primary suspect. A manhunt began. If you're in a relationship where you feel threatened or unsafe, please don't wait. Domestic violence escalates, and what starts as control or verbal abuse can turn deadly. Reach out before it's too late. Your life matters. Your safety matters. As the Matz family began the impossible task of planning 2 funerals, as a little boy recovered in a hospital bed, as students gathered to mourn at candlelight vigils, police closed in on the man who had shattered so many lives. But the question remained: how many system failures had aligned to allow this tragedy to happen? And could it have been prevented? The investigation moved with unusual speed. Within hours of the murders, police had a name: Jacques Deshawn Smith. The connection wasn't hard to make. Abbaney's recent police report about his violent assault was still fresh in the system. The protective order found among her belongings pointed directly to him. This wasn't a whodunit, it was a manhunt. But Smith wasn't hiding. In fact, he did something so brazen, so calculated, that it stunned investigators. Hours after the murders, while police were still processing the crime scene, Smith posted on Facebook, "Not a confession." Instead, he posted what appeared to be an alibi. In the post, he writes to Abby, likely Abbaney Matz, expressing disbelief about what had happened, saying he was waiting for her call to tell him it's all a lie. He expresses affection for her and someone referred to as Bunka, possibly Abbaney's son's nickname, claiming they mean everything to him. He mentions wishing they weren't going through difficulties and claims he would have protected them, stating that they would have had to get me first. That Facebook post was actually what helped lead to his arrest, a law enforcement source would later reveal. It showed consciousness of guilt. He knew exactly what he'd done. By the evening of February 3rd, police had issued a warrant for Smith's arrest. By the next day, February 4th, a multi-agency task force had tracked him to a residence in Rowlett, Texas. SWAT teams surrounded the house. There would be no dramatic standoff, no final shootout. Smith surrendered without incident. The courage he'd shown when confronting unarmed women, notably absent when facing armed officers. As Smith was led away in handcuffs, investigators were piecing together his extensive criminal history, a pattern of escalating violence that should have kept him behind bars long before February 3rd. At just 21, Smith had accumulated charges including evading arrest, theft, and aggravated robbery. The January 27th assault on Abbaney wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest in a series of violent outbursts. Yet somehow, he kept cycling through the system, each release another opportunity for violence. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As investigators reviewed security footage from Pride Rock Dormitory, they discovered how Smith had gained access to the supposedly secure building. And it wasn't through force or deception. He had a key, not a physical key, but a key card. Abbaney's key card. The university had a policy allowing overnight guests, and Abbaney had been issued a temporary access card for her stay. Smith had somehow obtained this card, whether through theft, coercion, or because Abbaney had simply left it somewhere accessible, remains unknown. This revelation sent shockwaves through the university community and campus security experts nationwide. The system, designed to keep students safe, key card access, limited entry points, guest registration, had been rendered useless by a simple oversight. No one had considered what happens when access credentials fall into the wrong hands. It's a vulnerability that exists on virtually every college campus in America, security consultant Michael Dorn would later explain. We design systems to control access, but we don't always account for human factors. For the Matz family, this revelation was another knife twist. The university had promised Deja would be safe in her dorm. Instead, the very system meant to protect her had facilitated her murder. As Smith was booked into the Hunt County Detention Center on capital murder charges, the full weight of his actions began to sink in. 2 young women dead, a child orphaned and wounded, families shattered, a campus traumatized, all because a man with a history of violence had been released on bond, violated a protective order, and exploited a security loophole. The pieces had fallen into place with devastating clarity. But for those left behind, the question remained: how many chances had the system had to stop this tragedy before it happened? And why had every single one been missed? The wheels of justice turned slowly for the Matz family. Jacques Deshawn Smith was charged with capital murder of multiple persons, a charge that carried the possibility of the death penalty in Texas. But charges and convictions are separated by a vast gulf of legal proceedings, evidence hearings, and potential plea negotiation. For Timothy Matz and Vanessa Calderon, the legal process became another layer of trauma. Each court appearance meant reliving the horror. Each delay felt like their daughters were being forgotten. Each legal technicality seemed designed to benefit the man who had destroyed their family. "We just want justice," Timothy told reporters outside the courthouse after one of Smith's hearings. "Nothing will bring my girls back, but he needs to be held accountable." While the criminal case proceeded at its glacial pace, the Matz family began asking harder questions, not just about Smith, but about the systems that had failed their daughters at every turn. Why was Smith released on bond after a violent assault involving weapons? Why wasn't the protective order enforced more aggressively? How did Smith gain access to a supposedly secure dormitory? Where was campus security during and after the shooting? These questions led the family to consider legal action against Texas A&M University Commerce. And that's when they hit another wall: institutional stonewalling. "The university has been less than forthcoming," the family's attorney would later state. "Basic information about security protocols, about what happened that day. They're treating it like state secrets instead of public safety information." The university, likely on advice from their legal team, limited their public statements to expressions of condolence and vague assurances about reviewing security procedures. Meaningful changes to dormitory access policies, guest registration requirements, or coordination with local law enforcement regarding protective orders were announced but implemented slowly, if at all. For students returning to campus after the murders, the administration's response felt inadequate. "They put up some signs and said they'd have more security," student Jalen Black noted. "But I still don't feel safe. How do we know this won't happen again?" It's a question that haunts not just Texas A&M University Commerce, but every college campus in America. The Matz sisters' murders exposed vulnerabilities in systems we take for granted: campus security, domestic violence protection, criminal justice. Each system had opportunities to prevent this tragedy. Each system failed. The Matz sisters' story is tragically common in its broad outlines: a violent partner, a protective order, a system that underestimates the danger. What makes their story unusual is only the setting: a college campus where young people should be safe to learn and grow. The true justice for Deja and Abbaney Matz won't come just from whatever sentence Jacques Smith ultimately receives. It will come when we fix the broken systems that failed them, when protective orders have teeth, when bond decisions consider victim safety, when campus security addresses real-world threats, when we take domestic violence as seriously as the life or death issue it truly is.